it is time for me to introduce Dr. Patrick Williams. He is a psychologist turned executive coach. He's worked with HP, IBM, and Kodak, among others. He's a philanthropist and educator, lifelong growth seeker, adventurer, and explorer. Pat is known as the Indiana Jones of the interior. I don't know exactly what that means, but I love the sound of that. His most recent book, Getting Naked, Emotional Transparency at the Right Time, the Right Place, and with the Right Person, is Pat's first teaching memoir and the inspiration for his program, Conscious Living Mastery, which you're going to get a taste of today. He's a passionate advocate for the coaching profession's ongoing growth and success. And in 2018, Pat was one of the first to be inducted into the ICF Circle of Distinction. That's pretty amazing. This is the latest of many awards that recognize his contributions to the coaching profession. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so fortunate to have Dr. Pat Williams with us today. Dr. Pat, please take it away.
Wow, thank you, Jimmy, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm not seeing myself right now because I blanked the screen, but I did put on my Florida shirt because I lived in Florida for about 14 years on 2 different stints in Palm Coast. But Colorado is where my heart's saying I'm back in Colorado, even though it gets flipping hot here too now with the changes in culture and climate change. But I've also got the river behind me. So that's the river in my backyard, the Cashlaputa River, which is very low right now, just like lakes around the country. But we can hope a change is coming, right? A good change, a good change. So I titled this talk today, and I've given this, gosh, I think to 18 different chapters during COVID years around the world, and a variation of this to Harvard's Institute of Coaching, which I'm also a founding member of. And today I tweaked it a little bit for you all. We're going to have one breakout and one experiential thing for the whole group. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions or things you want to post in chat, Jimmy's going to watch that. And I'll just take it away now. Let me just say a little bit about the title. I know it's a long title, but so authenticity and self-disclosure. My background as a psychologist is not a Freudian. I studied college in the 60s and 70s, got my doctorate in 77 in transpersonal psychology. And prior to that was humanistic psychology. So I studied with Carl Rogers. Yes, he was still alive when I was in my master's program. And really embraced Carl Jung and Viktor Frankl. So the whole human potential movement that gave rise to Esalen in California and all those things that my daughter calls woogity boogity stuff that I studied. But now it's kind of got to more research behind it, et cetera. And so I'm going to touch on some of the evidence-based research that talks about transformative coaching. And what do I mean by that? Just very quickly, you can do transactional coaching. You may have heard this distinction if somebody's coming for, let's say, health and wellness coaching. They want to get in better shape, lose weight, et cetera. You can be transactional. You can be transactional with a leadership client on skills of being better at leadership activities. A business coach is going to do some transactional, but eventually in the ICF definition of what we want to do is to get to the being of the person, to get to the who behind the what. And that's when it gets to be transformative. Now, the diving deep is a metaphor. I teach an advanced class on metaphors often, and I want to give you my metaphor for going deeper in coaching. And it is this. It is, I'm looking for why can't I do this? Oh, there we go. Okay. So when I talk about going deeper in coaching, a lot of times you hear the metaphor of the iceberg, right? Which is an anomaly in Florida. You wouldn't talk much about icebergs. But underneath the iceberg is supposed to be 90% of what a person doesn't know or what we haven't looked at or whatever. But I don't like that analogy or metaphor because what's under an iceberg? It's dark and cold. So I prefer a lot of what I learned about when I lived in Florida and visited the Caribbean and also the Great Barrier Reef and stuff is snorkeling and diving. So I did a lot of that in my years around that kind of culture. And here's the distinction I want to make. In coaching conversations, we want to help our clients put on their snorkel gear and just look under the surface. Just look under the surface of what's showing up in their life. Remember, we coach on what they don't know and what we don't know a lot. We're not teaching, telling, or consulting most of the time. And the idea of scuba diving is, yeah, okay, I went 112 foot deep in a ship, but that's a little scarier. And you got to have a partner and you got to have safety gear and all kinds of stuff. So we're not doing that. We're not going deep, deep, deep. We want to just help a client look under the surface. What's right there and what you're wanting to create, overcome, deal with, inspire. So I hope that makes sense. And coaching, of course, is the unique conversation space where these conversations take place with a wholehearted effort. And I mean that in a true sense. I'm going to say more about the heart math research and what's going on today with neurobiology, and some of you are familiar with that, but I'll share that in the context of this presentation. So how the two core competencies fit into this? Well, the old competencies, establishing agreement, coaching is and even the current ones, it's the same, establishing agreement. And you do that not just in a sentence, but in a time spent with a client and in every session. I mean, I teach in my mentoring classes, you can take up to 20 minutes clarifying and establishing the agreement, and almost all the 8 competencies will show up there. So coaching becomes a safe place where the unspoken and maybe the unknown of the client's wants, desires, and change. Why else would they come to coaching? We're not there to talk about what we already know and what we already do, but how do we do it differently? So why do clients come to coaching after all? Well, the concept of co-creating the relationship, we're in the transition now. So the new competency talks about cultivating trust and safety. Coaching is a committed listener and a confidant for personal and professional truth, for seeking change, for overcoming, for creating. And the concept of the competency of coaching presence, which is really the glue. I think that and curiosity are the 2 biggest recipes that ingredients that you can have in your recipe for successful coaching. Coaching presence is the inspiring and safe place for what's under the surface, to make that connection with an empathic listening, with a heart-to-heart connection with a client. And I hope this language makes sense. I'll give more direct interpretation of that in just a moment. But your presence is also, how do you set up your presence before a call? I mean, if you got stuff going on in your life, how do you go in and shut the door and be present? We've all, during COVID, we all suffered from what Adam Grant calls languishing. If you read that article in the Harvard Business Review, we're not depressed and we're not super energized. We're just kind of languishing. And a lot of us felt that, even in our professional roles. So why do your learners come to training? If any of you are involved in coaching schools or in any kind of training that you do, why do they come? Well, they're already natural helpers or some sort of confidant. Somebody told them they were good listeners. They're always the one they went to. Someone listened to their wants and desires, and they found out about coaching. But where do emotions fit in our training? As a psychologist in the early days, and I'm a founding member of the ICF, we kind of were taught or teaching to eschew emotions in coaching. Don't go there. Don't open that Pandora's box. But it's not the foray of psychotherapy. Emotions are part of any change a person is going through. And I'm going to say more about that. The new competencies, I mention emotions and or feelings at least 9 times in the description of those, both yours and the clients. So they're not to be denied. And there's some great stuff out there that I'll talk about, books like Emotional Agility by Susan David and other great resources that will help you with this. But compassionate curiosity is one of the best methods for understanding uniquenesses. I don't know if that's a word, but I apostrophized it anyway. Uniquenesses. And that helps with the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because if you're curious, you're less likely to step on and make faux pas. I've spoken in many countries around the world, and I always said to the interpreter, to the audience, please, if I say something that's embarrassing or wrong or incorrect, fix me, help me. I'm just being curious. So when we're getting to know our students and or our clients, that's the stand we take. Curiosity, openness, and setting the stage for what really fits under the coaching mindset, if you will look at the competencies in that regard. So why do clients come to coaching? Well, obviously they want new awareness, strategies, and behaviors. They're here to get their best self in health, wealth, love, or happiness. I don't think anything else fits under that, under anything person comes to coaching for, if it doesn't fit in those 4 categories. Oscar Wilde says, you might as well be yourself because everyone else is already taken. I love that. But now if you're coaching any younger people, teens, 20s, the X, the Z, whatever the new generation's called, they're still waiting to find out who they are. Carl Jung said that life purpose and understanding really don't show up with clarity until our 40s or maybe our 50s. But we're working on it. We get ideas. We get a sense. We get a sense of what we like and who we are. And that may change. A lot of coaches these days are talking about the I am, the I am statement. Who are you really? So we're going to do a little exercise about that. As the caterpillar said to Alice in Wonderland, he said, the hookah smoking caterpillar, who are you? So we're going to play a name game before we do a breakout. And Jimmy, I think I see we have how many people in here? Oh, I'm not hearing you.
Okay, there we go. Looks like without you and I, it's 21.
Okay. All right. So we'll probably do breakouts of 3. So just get ready for that.
Okay.
I want you to think back to your early years, your developing years, childhood, little beyond. How was your name attached to stories? What you're called, the name you were given, perhaps a nickname. So this is kind of a non-threatening, not a deep disclosure, but a way for you to share with a group of 3 in a minute. What stories or experiences might be attached to your name, what you were called in your younger years, good or bad? And how has that changed today? So your name, what you were called, what's related to that in terms of good, bad experiences and stories. And we'll take, let's take 9 minutes.
Okay.
And then we'll have you come back and share some of that in the room.
All right. Let me see if it will let me. Let me see. 9 minutes. Here we go. 9. Okay. All right. And then we'll have a little countdown as well. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to open up the rooms. 1 did not get assigned. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. It looks like, yeah, everybody got assigned. I don't know why it's telling me somebody didn't get assigned. It looks like, yeah, I don't know. We're all assigned.
Okay.
All right. I am going to, there we are. Marsha's back, all smiling. Amelia's back.
I pressed the button too quick and I dumped the rest of my group.
Oh,
Sorry
and
about
how
that.
could you?
Hello there. I guess I was trigger happy. I didn't read it.
It happens.
I just want to say I'm dialing in from Canada, from Toronto today, and I'm really thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Congratulations from the Great White North. Welcome down here to sunny South Florida.
Oh, it's sunny here today too.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, your summers are pretty lovely up there.
Yeah, too short, unfortunately.
That's true.
Not like our South Florida summers.
No.
So much fun.
It's too bad we were having a good conversation and then I just left my game.
So do we have everybody back or no?
Looks like, yeah, I think everyone's back now because we lost one, so we're all good. Everybody's back.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. I gave you enough time to have some discussions, although I always have to laugh at this because it's like I'm a Star Trek fan, and you remember Beam Me Up, Scotty, and that whole thing. This Zoom is kind of like that, but some people got lost, came back early. It's like we have as much trouble with airplane travel. If we ever have that molecule transmigration thing, I hope it all arrives at the same place. So we'll get there someday. Um, and I think we're going to have, after Zoom, probably in 5 years, we'll probably have, like in Star Wars, Help Me Obi-Wan Kenobi. We'll have holograms where the person is right on your desk, something like that. Don't laugh. That's probably true. Okay,
I'm ready
so
for it.
let's hear from 2 or 3 people about their experience. The rest of you can put something in chat. But here's I'll go first. So my real name is Thomas, and I've never been Thomas. It's Thomas Patrick Williams. I'm named after Thomas Patrick McCormick. My great grandfather was an Irish railroad man, and so I was always called Tom when I showed up in school, and I didn't want to be Tom. And people nowadays say, "Well, how come you go by Pat?" And I go, "Ask my mother. She did it." So don't name a kid by their middle name. It causes problems the rest of your life. And I go by Patrick because in email, or back in the old days with snail mail, I didn't want getting mail to Ms. Pat Williams. There's assumptions that are made. So there's some things, I got called Patty and Patrici and things like that as a joke. But so those are some of my stories. What are some of yours?
Well, Iris has a good one from our group because Eric and I didn't have any funny. Iris had a great story.
Well, I don't know how great it is, but thank you. I was just saying that there wasn't a whole lot of family background known or discussion about exactly who these people were in Europe or their relationship to the family. There was some estrangement there, especially on my paternal side. But they did speak about my 2 great grandfathers for whom I was named. And they spoke of them as very smart, kind, scholarly people who were linguists, who spoke multiple languages, who were writers. And at first, I thought it was kind of a burden. But, as I grew up, I related to a lot of those interests. And I felt proud that people connected me to those particular skills and interests. I never really did learn a lot about them as people, and all of that is sort of dead and buried. They didn't really want to discuss it, but just only mention these 2 people and sort of almost put some expectations on me around that.
Yeah, thank you, Iris, for sharing that. Let's hear from one more, a quick story about your name and memories and stories associated with that.
I'll go. My name has always been, I've always really loved my name, not for any, before I even actually knew what my name represented and what it meant. It certainly has always been, and is even more so now that I'm older. It becomes a conversation starter.
Yeah.
It's also triggered some interesting nicknames that I didn't when I was much older. Shocker, shock, shark, lots of nicknames that I've gotten from different people, but it tends to be a conversation starter where people are trying to figure out, if they don't know where it comes from, and that becomes like the gist of the initiation of the conversation, or people who understand the meaning and then want to go deep into that and have a discussion about it. So that's my experience with my name.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that.
Yeah, thank you, Shakti and Iris both. So this is a thing that's pretty non-threatening, but does some self-revelation and some stories, and can be an icebreaker in groups. It can be a way with clients. If people don't get comfortable with sharing what they haven't shared, which is a lot of coaching, and this does not mean the client isn't sharing and keeping secrets from you. It means they don't yet know what they haven't shared, or they're sharing what they don't yet know. I mean, that's what we do in coaching, right? We unveil, we get deeper, we scratch the surface a little bit, to use another metaphor. So the name game is to give you an experience where you can say, that's a little bit of self-disclosure, and it's a fun one to do. If you look at the new competencies, oh, why is my screen going round and round now? Oh dear. Oh, here we go. Thank goodness. Okay. So I believe, and my whole position in this presentation is that the time has come to embrace emotional learning as a key success factor. Working with emotions, both yours and the client's. Have you ever had a situation where a client shared something and you got emotional? I'm guessing some of you, maybe most of you have. How do you deal with that? How do you capture the emotions and be empathetic? And if something gets triggered in you, where do you debrief that? We'll say more about that in a little bit. So, Carol Dweck, who's famous for her growth mindset, learning mindset versus growth mindset, is love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes and enjoy effort and keep on learning. You know, it's the idea of growth. There's even, as a psychologist, I specialized in post-traumatic stress for a lot of my practice. Well, now there's research on post-traumatic growth, which is a good thing to see. There's lots of stories I can tell you about that, having worked with veterans and abuse survivors, and even a prisoner of war that I did an assessment of that just was not bothered when he was returned. This famous name, I won't share the case, but it was like he didn't have post-traumatic stress. He was able to deal with it in some way with a growth mindset that came back whole and capable. So now, somebody mentioned conversation starter a while ago about names. That's what the wheel of life is. I'm guessing that most of you have used some form of this. It's not just a wheel and it's not a tire. We have flat parts and unflat. It's an energy wheel, but it is a conversation starter. And this is where you can begin to get deeper with a client. If they score themselves some low point in romance or personal growth or business career, that may be not while they're for coaching. That may not be why they're there for coaching, but these are all interconnected. And if you say, well, tell me a little bit about what this number represents to you, that begins to be a little bit of sharing. And you can ask questions that go just a little deeper. Remember, we're just going snorkeling. We're not going diving. Now my system is spinning again. I don't know why I don't have a good. Okay, here we go. So emotions are powerful emotions. And some of you have probably seen this by now. Emotions really are energy in motion. And emotion is derived from the Latin word emovere, meaning to move, move out, or move through. Also from the French, coming from émouvoir, which means to stir up. So the origin of the word is to move, to stir up, and that's where emotion. Now today in research, we actually can show neurologically that when an emotion is expressed, a different part of the brain lights up. There is a shift that occurs. And as an assessor, those of you who've gone for certification probably had a mentor who said, are you noticing the client's energy? When they took a sigh, when they took a breath, when maybe they got a little emotional, we don't interpret the emotion. We say, I noticed your energy just shifted. What just happened there? What are you experiencing? And as that's shared, it shifts. If it's not shared, then it becomes contained in the system. And I'll say about that in a moment. These are the commonly recognized emotions: anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, and contempt. There's obviously many more if you get to nuances of it. But notice that happiness is in the place of center. Well, I didn't put it there. It was on this list, but I think that's where we want to come to. It's like the balance point of a teeter-totter, or when you're standing on the deck of a sailboat, we're always making adjustments, right? So if you've got anger, fear, disgust, or sadness, surprise, and contempt, and that gets expressed, the goal is to come back to center, to happiness, to satisfaction. But if they're not expressed, they get suppressed or expressed through what we call emotional leakage. Emotional leakage is when somebody might share too much based on some past experiences that have happened. You say something and they blow up at you. That's not all about you. It's all about, the dog that made a mess in the house, about the child who broke something, about the car wreck, whatever it might be, about the angry person at work. So as Susan David talks about in her book, Emotional Agility, The need for emotional flexibility and resilience has become a key component of coaching. Now, Carl Jung, who I studied a lot of, said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. That's just my fate. No, if you become more conscious, another word for that is increased awareness, it won't be that way for you. So a lot has been studied in the last, 25 years since Daniel Goleman came out with his book. EQ. Okay, well, a lot of people study and learn about emotional intelligence, but then what? Well, I call awareness intelligence EQ applied. Not only the concept of psychological safety in the workplace and in training, a judgment-free space in coaching, which you also are developing with your client or the training organization that hired you. Then emotional expression and learning, if we have good EQ, then it demands intelligent expression of that awareness. How do you take the intelligence and use sharing? How do you apply it, make it applicable? There was a game I used with my kids when they were very young and also in play therapy with clients as a therapist called Barrel of Monkeys. Some of you may have seen this, some of you may not. It's a plastic barrel. It's got these long arm monkeys that are in there, and you see how many you can pull out, hook together. Well, that's kind of the metaphor for what happens with our emotions that don't get expressed. They get stuffed in the barrel, hidden in what Carl Jung might have called our shadow, and then they come out through that emotional leakage because they weren't expressed at the time. We call that amygdala hijacking. You know, when somebody just reacts angrily, vociferously, they got hooked. And that hooking, like the monkey's arms, is bringing out a lot of stuff that was connected but not relevant to the situation at hand. So I talk about creating personal decompression routines. What does one do to come in a moment of centering, whether it's a meditation, a place of comfort, security, visualization? There's a lot of that I teach in my trainings. But what do you do? What do you do to decompress about something that was frustrating or happened? And some of this you can shift into your teaching hat and offer to your client. Remember, we're not 100% coaching all the time. So self-reflection and an honesty check-in, clear the decks. That might be something you need to do with your mentor or co-coach or colleagues that you have, but it's also what the client is doing between sessions and what's up for today that they need to clear the deck before they're ready for coaching. It may not be emotions, but it's like most of us start with, is there anything you need to say or, put in the moment here between us before we get started with coaching? Just to become prepared, to become present. Not a long story, just a clear the deck. My computer's being mean to me for a minute. Just I should have sent this to you, Jimmy, as a backup, but it should open up here pretty soon.
Let's see. If you try going forward again, maybe there. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, I did. There we go. So I use a metaphor in my book, Getting Naked, and also in my program called the Velveteen Rabbit Approach to Living a Vital and Well-Lived Life. If you're familiar with that children's book, I think it's one of the greatest ones ever written and perfect for adults as well. Most coaches have a life well lived. We're not coaches at age 20, unless we're coaching somebody in that age range, but we coach because we have life experience of what we've overcome, developed, created, challenged, etc. And now we're coaching others to follow that path. Not our path, but their path toward better living. A life well lived, and the lessons then become guides to knowing and hearing our clients better. The curious paradox, Carl Rogers said, is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And if you don't know, Carl Rogers is one of the founders of humanistic psychology movement and the founders of client-centered therapy, which greatly influenced coaching philosophically and practically. So how do we create more naked talk? And how can you do that without wanting to fix or treat or get in the way? How can you avoid that hook of, oh, I so want to fix this client's problem or give them more depth understanding and all that stuff that, I trained in my school, the Institute for Life Coach Training, that I started in 98 and sold in 2012. I still teach for them. But it geared itself in the early days toward other therapists wanting to transition or add coaching to their mix. A lot of them had trouble letting go of the expert role, letting go of knowing what to do, a protocol for depression, a protocol for, child therapy or whatever. In coaching, we get paid for asking questions we don't know the answer to. And that's one of the great things about it. So how can you be a conduit for new learning, new choices, and new zest that comes for your client or adult learner if you're in a training modality? Encourages courageous vulnerability. I think that's probably a term from Brene Brown, but it's one that I've come to adapt because we want to be vulnerable and we have to be courageous. But the title of my book is At the Right Time, the Right Place, and with the Right Person. You don't want to get emotionally naked any more than you want to get physically naked in the wrong place with the wrong person in the wrong time, right? Skinny dipping or not, you're still careful. We all hide stuff. Research shows that attempting to minimize or ignore only serves to amplify them. Oftentimes in the early days, we talked a lot about energy drainers. You may not use that word much in coaching anymore, but what are the things that detract a client and or you from having the energy to move forward in a strategy or goal that you have? We call those energy drainers. Now, masks are a concept of hiding things. They're necessary at times, but do we know we're wearing one? So like if your client goes to the annual Christmas party and they're going, oh God, this is going to be the same old schmoozy, whatever. If they know they're wearing a mask, then they'll go as their mask with consciousness. If some client is going back to a family reunion and they're going, oh, this is going to be Uncle Charlie and all this stuff that always happens, have them wear a mask on purpose. It's almost observing themselves, watching themselves, if that makes sense. So a mask is necessary at times, but do you know you're masking? Are you covering up momentarily? And I've got a chapter in my book called Your Shadow, Don't Leave Home Without It. Well, if you remember in Peter Pan, I love children's stories, when his shadow got shut in the window by Wendy, he had to come back and get his shadow sewn on by her. We really can't leave our shadow. It doesn't rip off like it did in that metaphorical story. We always have it. Oh, and I'll say more about the shadow too, because shadow work in coaching is simply where can the light be shined on what's not known? Again, like diving deep. We don't go deep, dark into some tunnel. We're not looking for psychosurgery, right? It's just what needs the light shined on it. Bring it out into the sunlight. Maybe it's an aspiration a client gave up on because they got married young or had a child young or made a choice of a different career path, but it's still there. They still want to do X. Well, where can that show up in their life now? This is just a little picture. You're probably all familiar with this concept, but clients come to coaching to have more or do something different, to have less of something. But the beingness is where we want to get now in masterful coaching. Who are they being and how do they need to change? How does this work you're on, this path you're on, affect you? So we get to the you of coaching. And that's very clear in the new competencies that many of you can see the markers of. So going deeper in coaching is transforming clients' lives with transformational coaching. Holding the mirror to ourselves. Where are we needing to smooth out some rough edges? Where are there some things we need to deal with to be present? Not totally realized, sitting on a mountaintop chanting, but just aware and clear and available to be present. Now I'm going to do this one real quickly in a matter of time, but there's a researcher named Pennebaker that did research on expressing meaningfully. And today, as you all know, depression is up, suicide is up, lots of traditional domestic violence is up during all this. So there are mental health challenges in all phases of life. He learned that people who engage in expressive writing report feeling happier and less negative than before. And similarly, reports of depressive symptoms, rumination, and general anxiety tend to drop in the weeks and months after writing about emotional upheavals. Now, that just was writing. I'm saying take it the next step. What happens when they're sharing? Now, I don't mean that to express like you're getting therapy clients, but people have the four-letter word stuff happens to them. Life happens, right? How do they share it? I mean, over the course of coaching, I had somebody whose son got killed. I've had people whose husband died. You will too. Life happens in between working with a healthy client. So the wisdom of the body is also here. And I want to do this one real quickly. When somebody's over emotionally challenged, we go to our head, typically. We think, we ruminate. What can I do? Oh my God, woe is me, and all those sorts of things. And the wisdom of the gut is you get intuition and a sense of what I can do differently. If you've seen the research on the heart, though, from a concept called HeartMath, there is an organization that's been around, I think, almost 30 years now, heartmath.com, or maybe it's .org, but just look up HeartMath. The research is showing, and this has been replicated in many labs, there are 40,000 neurites in the heart. Neurological material, 40,000 neurites in the heart, and the heart does communicate with your brain. So we're going to do a quick little exercise right here that you can also do with clients. We won't do breakout, but I just want everybody to sit where they are. And some of you might even want to stand because it gets your spine straight up. And sometimes I have my clients change their posture just for that. But I want you to think of a current challenge you have. Just something little, big, whatever you're working on, challenged by, stuck with. And just think of that in your head. What are your thoughts about that? Where are you stuck? What's the rumination? What the words that come to mind about that? How to solve this problem? Okay, now take a moment, keep your eyes closed if they are, and let yourself drift down where you put 2 fingers on your heart. Just touch your heart. And now say, what message from my heart do I get about this? Okay, here's the deal. It should be quick, brief, and maybe some people can share in chat right now. What was the message from your heart about whatever the issue was? What'd your heart tell you? Somebody can post some of those in chat. I'll make a point from it. Okay. Susan says, let it go. Kim, need to grieve a loss. To soften the thoughts. I'm going to be okay. Need to grieve. So it's always a brief message. Be present. There's one. Because the heart is not dealing with logic. If your client does this and they start to think, well, my heart said, have you thought about this? And maybe you could do, no, that's your brain. You went back to your brain. The heart just gives a quick thing. If you want to read about this, my friend Greg Braden, if you've heard of his work, he's got, I can't remember the name of the book, but just Google this. Greg Braden, Braden, Little Brain in the Heart. He talks about the research, and you can find just that page. You don't have to go buy the book. This is neurologically sound, and I love the comments people put in chat. That is an exercise you can do with clients. It's not woogity boogity. It's backed up with science and neurology. So I also do a little bit with metaphors. I mentioned that earlier. Metaphors are a way that we can not bypass, but get to emotions without using the stories. You know, you can use stories that might have a teaching component, but metaphors, if a person says something in coaching, and we assessors, you know, if a client uses a metaphor and you step over it, well, there's a metaphor right there, stepping over it. We want you to go deeper with it. If the client says, I'm just really stuck, tell me more about stuck. How does that stuck show up for you? There's wisdom in that. Or if they say, I don't know, I just feel out of control, like I'm just sliding down a ski slope and my skis are off, and you know, whatever comes up, don't ignore it. Direct or implied. And you can also learn, in my course, I talk about how do you give metaphors, how do you create them. You can use guided imagery, etc. And just for fun, I call the course Metaphors Be With You, you Star Wars fans. Now, there's one last thing I'm going to cover, and then we'll open it up to questions. Well, in fact, maybe I won't cover this because I don't want to take a bunch of time. But Bronnie Ware in New Zealand did a study on what people wish they'd done. These were dying patients. And if you look at all this, even number 3, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. I will make this PowerPoint available. Jimmy can share it with whomever. This one too, it's out of my book. I won't go into that real time. But here's one I want to end with. I wrote an article for Forbes a few years ago because when the new CEO of Goldman Sachs was hired, he trained his managers to be more transparent. What did that mean? More authentic. When the client comes, when an employee came to work and said, and you said, "Hi, how are you?" The training was, we really want to know. Don't walk on down the hall and say, "Oh, I'm fine." Really want to know. So you don't need a whole story, but the person might say, "Oh God, my 16-year-old daughter told my wife and I last night she's pregnant. We don't know what we're going to do." Or I just got word that my mother has cancer, or whatever. It could be whatever, right? The response is, "Wow, thanks for sharing. If you need any support, it's really good to know that you're dealing with." That's it. It's just a little bit of authenticity modeled by the manager. Well, this can also be modeled in you in coaching. So just last quick thing, I've got the new course that Jimmy mentioned, Conscious Living Mastery. There are 24 ICF CCEUs. So if it only CCEs, it doesn't count toward a level 1, level 2 program that's being developed now. But if you need CEUs for recertification, this is 16 core, 8 resource. It's all asynchronous, pre-recorded, do it at your own time. I do have a live Facebook group where you get some of Pat. But take a look at that. There's a discount. And then my website, if you want a quick little handout called Personal Treasure Hunt, go to drpatwilliams.com/winner, and you'll get a free download of that. And that's the end of my show.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Pat. Woo! Awesome. Everybody, a big round of applause, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Yeah, I'm glad you have time for that. I know I hurried through it, but I want to give you time for this because a lot of the wisdom and a lot of the personal application comes from this point right here. So who's got a comment or share that they would like to bring up now?
No, Marcia, go ahead and come off mute. All right, let me see. I'll do it for you. Hold on one second.
Yes, I'd
There we go.
written in the chat. So I understand the difference between the head. Can you explain the difference between listening to the heart or the gut? Because I think of them as being closely related.
Well, they are. There's neurological material in the gut too. So when you have that intuitive hit, that inkling, that's just something that comes to you. But the heart message, sometimes we ignore. We don't think about that. And yet look at all the poetry and stuff throughout life. It's always heart. Indigenous tribal communities, heart, heart, heart. You start looking at this research, and it is the crux of empathy that happens in coaching. There's a concept I didn't mention called mirror neurons. When people you relate to right away, there's a mirror neuron. Your body is actually mirroring what the client is expressing, and you do that at an unconscious level. That comes from the heart, not from the head. So I hope that helps, Susan. Marcia, thank you.
No, I appreciate the references too. I'll check into all of those. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Who else got a question or a comment?
Come on, all you shy people out there. We've got about 22 minutes left, 28
Wow.
minutes. Come on now. I will say one thing while people are thinking or finishing lunch. I love the Carl Rogers quote there. What is it again? Once I understand or accept myself, then I can begin to change.
Yes.
That's so
Yes.
powerful, because how can you change if you don't know where you are, right?
Right. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I mean, I had the pleasure in my master's program, which was at University of West Georgia in Carrollton. I went there, I mean, you think West Georgia, holy mackerel, but it was a hotbed for humanistic theory. I've got a story about that really promoted me to write what I wrote and to get into coaching, really, but I didn't know it at the time. So not only was Carl Rogers in my master class, but there was a professor from University of Florida, a Canadian professor named Sidney Girard, who wrote a book called Disclosing Man to Himself and The Art of Self-Disclosure. I've even got the original copy. So here's a quick story. And this is the kind of thing that can be useful in coaching. It might be something you share with a client that's a teaching moment. Sidney Girard came to a fish fry at one of my professor's house in this small southern town in Georgia. And oh man, I was 24 years old at the time, maybe 25. And I said, Professor Girard, would you sign a copy of your book? And he said, sure. And he took the book and he signed it, And then I said, I just got to tell you, this book has been so transformational for me because humanistic theory allowed the therapist to be a little self-disclosing, to share enough about us to be a model for that kind of work. And I said, I hope I can write a book like this someday. He said, give me that book back. And he signed it, Pat, if you never write your book, you have no one to blame but yourself. Now, here's the kicker. I've still got a copy of that. The next day, he went back to Gainesville, and he was working on his car, and the jack slipped and crushed him, and he died. So that was like one of those deathbed messages where I knew, oh my God, I have to really live up to this. Now, I've written 6 other books. Some of them are second editions in the coaching field, but this Getting Naked with Your Clothes On book, or bigger title, is really what I always wanted to write in Sidney Girard's style, about the power of self-disclosure. And it's not sharing secrets in the wrong place. It's not going deep, deep, deep. It's just what's not being shared. A coaching question you can even ask a client is there anything you haven't shared with me that might be important for me to know? We did a thing at Rotary yesterday, in my Rotary meeting, where the person had to share something the people at the table don't know about us. And it was like, these are people that have known each other for 30 years. Always an interesting exercise because people will think of something. So any other
You tell them to keep it G-rated?
yeah, well, it depends on your audience, waste time and
It may be TMI.
Yeah. Well, that's up
read
to
the
you.
room and then speak out loud.
Yeah. But if you talk about that, I think that was Marcia made that comment. It, depending upon the time, this idea of self-disclosures, we've all done stuff in our past that we either chose or didn't choose. We happened to us or we got into messes. You don't know that. And it might be something that haunts a client. It's not that you need to hear it, but do they have a place where they can write about it? Now, that exercise I didn't go into depth about you is, I don't have it up, but let me open it up. So yeah, my take action, you'll have it in the slides. I don't think I could get back to it real quickly, but it's a six-step process. And let me just relate that to you. The first 3 are, can you recall an event? This is an exercise in my book. Recall something that has haunted you, or that's unfinished, or that still it's like buried in there and you'd be embarrassed to share it. And then reflect on that. What happened? Who was there? When did this occur? So you're revealing it to yourself. So the 3 steps are recall, reflect, reveal it to yourself. And you're writing this in a personal journal like Pennebaker talked about. The next 3 steps get a little more risky. Reveal to another. Who could be your committed listener that you trust? And I think we only need 1 or 2 people in our life that we really go to for that. Women have always been better at that than men. but a coach becomes that, perhaps. I just need to share this with you, or I keep reliving this. I'm not talking about deep, dark stuff from the past. It might be something from last year. It could be something that, you got a speeding ticket and wrecked your car and it's embarrassing. Who knows what it might be? But if it bothers you and it's revealed to another, it loses its power. And then you're able to follow the metaphor of a computer reboot. You clean the system, you defrag, you're rebooting, and then you can get on with a restart, like your life. Push the restart button. Now I can live without this thing. In my work with post-traumatic stress, people learned that the memories of whatever was causing them the stress became just a story. They weren't living it like it was still happening, which is what happens to soldiers and crash victims and probably people that witnessed the shooting recently in Hyde Park or Highland Park, or South Florida or all the other places. How do you have that become just a memory, not like you're living it all over again? That's the distinction. Post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, there's a big difference. Thank you for that, Dr. Pat. It looks like Ann Matlow has a question. Ann.
Okay. Unmute.
I am, thank you. So I was struck by when you were talking about the commonly recognized emotions and that everything was, anchoring back to happiness. And I just put that on the table for discussion, because is that always somewhere we want to bring our client back to? Is that the proper wording? Is that, maybe it's just sort of,
yeah, no, it's not
I
a goal.
misunderstood.
Yeah, well, no, you didn't. But I'm not saying, geez, we're there to have our clients be happy. We're there to have them express and let it go wherever it goes. If there are things blocking progress, decisions, here's another metaphor, Ann, that will fit that, because this is a true story too. We talk about work-life balance a lot in coaching, right? No such thing. Nowadays it's called work-life
Integration up here. Yeah.
So when I was in Denver years ago, my late wife and I saw a Cirque du Soleil performance where they used horseback. So it was in a small, fairly large, but not like the auditorium in Orlando for Cirque du Soleil. It was horseback, 2,500 in attendance, and I just was in awe of what these people could do and the balance they showed, and jumping and bouncing off walls, landing on horse. It's just amazing if you've ever seen it. And an intermission, where of course they're selling programs and T-shirts and everything else, I asked one of the performers, how do you do that? The balance that you show is just something that is amazing to me. And he said, oh, well, obviously you weren't paying attention. I go, what do you mean? He goes, we're in a constant state of motion. Balance is temporary. Balance is momentary. That lit the fire in me to say, that's what we do in our life and with our clients, is if you have a place to come back to, a centering point.
Pod moim krzesłem i zaraz na ciebie najadę i tyle będzie z tego piwka.
I don't know if that was a comment for me or for somebody in the background, but if you have a place to come back to, those can be centering techniques that can happen in the moment. I could teach you a technique. We want to do the whole thing here, but place of comfort and security, or place of personal power. And here's the recipe for it. I won't have you do it, but it's easy to do. Have yourself or a client think of the most beautiful place you've ever been. The just perfect place that you went to in the mountains of Switzerland or the mountains of Colorado or the beach in the Caribbean or wherever, right? Now, first of all, I want you to just use your eyes and see all that there is to see where you are. And you do this slowly. It only takes 5 to 7 minutes, but just where do you see off in the distance? What about right around you, up above you, down below you? What do you see just with your visual capacity? And now let's add hearing. Now let's add auditory. We're going to bring the place alive, turn up the volume. What sounds are you hearing? The sounds of nature, of water, of wind, maybe of your heartbeat, maybe of sounds off in the distance that are just part of this scene. And if it's a sound you don't like, turn it off. Make this the most beautiful, perfect place you can always go to. So you do that for a while. And then you say, now we're going to add the component of feelings. And feelings come in two components. One is kinesthetic. How do you feel where you are right now, standing on the earth or sitting on the ground or wherever you are? What do you feel in your body kinesthetically, physically? So you'll do that for a while, a few seconds. And then say, now feelings emotionally. What emotions do you have in this place? What are you feeling inside, in your heart, in your, just what are you feeling emotionally? And then I have them look around, bring back a memento from the place. It could be a picture in their mind. It could be a rock, a twig, whatever's going to remind them that this is a place they can always go back to. And you can do this in a moment's notice without the other person even knowing you're doing it. If you're in a stressful situation, go to your place, keep listening. You can be bifurcated a little bit, but this is an amazing way to decompress quickly. And it's very, very useful that can be taught to clients. I hope that was relevant and helpful, Ann.
Well, it was helpful for me.
Good.
I'm sure it was for Anne as well, but she's muted now. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm going while we're waiting on more. Oh, here Susan asked, could you talk a little more about coaching with the client who overly emotionally presents or conversely has a hard time accessing their own emotions? So those are two very different kinds of situations,
Yeah.
it sounds like.
Yeah, let me answer the second one first, because there are people, it's not that you have to dig for emotional sharing. If it doesn't show up, it doesn't show up. There are people that maybe they're not ready, or maybe it's not yet an awareness that they have. But if you look for energy shift, if you don't label it for them. So when coaches say, oh, I hear your sadness about that, that's interpreting. You might be right, but it's more masterful to say, wow, your energy just shifted. What are you experiencing? What did you just experience? So that's a word that even a mechanical engineer will get. They may not like the word feeling, or a scientifically minded person that's more logical than emotional. But we've all got that. So that's the second one. The first one was, let me see if I can remember, Jimmy. It was who emotes too much.
Overly emotionally presents.
Yeah, let me think about that. If we come from a place of observation and curiosity, I might say to my client, Bob, there's something I want to share. I noticed that a lot of times what comes up in our coaching are some emotional reactions that seem to overwhelm you or seem to take over. And I don't know, that's just, what do you think about that? That's a shot in the dark, but it's not judging, it's being curious. And is this a safe place, or are there other places where you find your expression of the emotions you're sensing right now that get to become, what's the word? That become complete. Maybe that's the word. You ask your client, what do you need for these to be less overwhelming for you? I don't know, something like that. Was that, whoever asked the question, was that helpful? Yeah, Susan, okay.
Great. So we have time for one more question. And while you're thinking of a question, I'm going to put into the chat. I just want to remind everybody, please take the survey so we can get some good feedback and some words of gratitude and thanks back to Dr. Pat. Also, I put the link in there for the Business Growth Mastermind and for the 20th anniversary. Sign up for if you're interested in the mastermind, get in there before we run out of seats. And also the conference, you definitely want to sign up for that because that's an amazing opportunity there. Again, $137, you're going to get all day with Magda Mook, Janet Harvey, and Dory Clark. And I still, Misha and we can't believe we got Dory Clark to come. So if you don't know her, please look it up. Dori. Here, I'm going to type it in here.
Yeah.
Dori. Dr. Pat can tell you.
That is one amazing conference. I wish I'm holding back.
Come on down. We got space. I'll give you some stage if you want.
I'll have to eat a virtual dinner.
Okay. Well, we'll record the whole thing and I'll send you the recording if you like.
Oh, man. Awesome.
Do we have any other questions? We got time for one more if you've got one. Anybody? No, I know that was fantastic. Dr. Pat, thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing. Everybody enjoyed it. I'm sure they did. I know I did. This is really, really good. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing just a little bit of wisdom from all of your books. What's the name of your new one coming out? You said you were in the middle, if you can share.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Becoming a Professional Life Coach is going to be in its 3rd edition by Norton Books.
Okay.
So it's in for copy editing. I added a whole bunch about emotional and psychological safety and neuroscience. So it's got more of that. But it's been a really good textbook since the first edition was 2005. The second edition was 2015. Now it's time for another one.
There we go. There's always time for updates. I love it. Thank you so much for being prolific. And wow, I can't believe you studied with Carl Rogers and Viktor Frankl and all of those. Like, that's incredible. So we are in the presence of some pretty amazing minds right now.